Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Charlie Duke. Charlie is a legendary Apollo 16 astronaut, test pilot, and the youngest person ever to walk on the moon. As Lunar Module Pilot in 1972, he spent over 20 hours exploring the lunar surface, leaving a powerful legacy of human exploration. A decorated Air Force brigadier general and one of only 12 moonwalkers in history, Duke's career bridges the cutting edge of spaceflight and military aviation. Today, he inspires new generation as a speaker and advocate for curiosity, faith, and the boundless potential of humanity's journey beyond Earth. Charlie, welcome to the Future Space.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's certainly good to be with you. Looking forward to our time together.
It's nice to see you again. We did have a great time together in Antarctica last holiday. It was so special to share that with you.
Well, it was a great trip. Thank you for inviting us, and we sure enjoyed being on board with you. It was my last bucket list. That was the only continent I've never visited, and so to get on the continent of Australia, number 7, was a great experience for me.
Charlie, what would be 3 words that for you capture the essence of space?
Probably I would pick the awesome beauty. Space is, of course, in the daylight, which is all the way to the moon and back, you don't see the stars, but you see the Earth. And if you get right, you can see a planet or two through your telescope that you have for navigation purposes. But the Earth was just suspended up there in the blackness of space. And the first time we came around from the backside of the moon and we were in orbit, we saw Earthrise for the first time. It was breathtakingly beautiful. And another thought I had was, we're a long way from home. I hope this thing holds together. But you see stars on the dark side you see all the stars and the planets come out, and the stars are not twinkling because there's no atmosphere. And but then in the daylight, the stars disappear, and it's just a blackness of space. And the only thing I remember seeing was the Earth suspended out there in that blackness, and it was beautiful, blue and white and brown. The land doesn't appear green from space; it's all brown color that I recall. Anyway, it was we never got tired of looking at it. While we were on the moon, we landed in the middle of the moon as you view it from Earth, and that put the Earth directly overhead. So on the moon, I wonder what the Earth, I'd look up and I'd look at the top of my helmet. So we had to either look through the periscope that we had to point our antenna, or grab hold of the rover and lean way back and look up, and then we could see it. And when we landed, it was a half Earth, and the moon was half. The moon was going towards the full, the Earth was going towards the new. So the section we could see got narrower and narrower.
If I ask you, Charlie, what is the human story of space, what would that bring to you?
Well, hard work, training, preparation. The other would be the awesome beauty that you see and the wonder of it all. I'm in space, and I'm looking back at my home 230,000 miles away. So years ago, there was a guy did a special on the moon. That was not a DVD deal, but anyway, and he called it The Wonder of It All. And that still sticks with me. And the wonder of it all is, to me, that we got there and we were actually on the moon. Buzz Aldrin called it magnificent desolation, as a beautiful description of the moon. The moon was, to me, a beautiful place, but it was rugged, hostile, but it had a sense of beauty about it. But looking up at, in orbit, looking out at the Earth as it rose up, that's where I would describe it as just a wonder. Man, look at what we've done. Look at how far we've come. It's an impression that now, over 53 years later, I still have vivid memories.
Do you think it's feasible to think that we will have a permanent presence on the moon? I mean, you've been there, you've kind of experienced a little bit of the geographic reality, the physicality of the moon. Does it make sense, or would it be better just to go to Mars or build some space station?
Well, I'm not a Mars fan. The Mars mission, 6 months there, 6 months back. You're in extreme radiation the whole way. And we've gotten so good with AI and robots. Why risk people, exposing them to all that radiation? And so I'm for an unmanned exploration of Mars using robotics. And it's a big deal to expose human beings for a year of radiation and have special spacecraft materials and et cetera, et cetera. But I am a proponent of building a space station on the moon. We have stations in Antarctica, which are very, very hostile environment, but they man them all year round. So we can do that on the moon, starting with Artemis. Their first landings are going to be like Apollo on the equator. But the final choice for Artemis is to land at near the South Pole, because if there's water on the moon, it's down there in the form of ice. And we have some indications that it's there. So I see us building a space station slowly, incrementally, like we did Space Station. It didn't go up all at once. It was built in components, if you will. And that would eventually evolve into a permanent manned station on the moon. I think we could extract some water, learn how to extract water and other minerals from the moon. So it would, to me, is the ideal spot for long duration stay is the moon. Leave Mars to robotics, and let's go to the moon, and we can build a space station on the moon easily, and inflatable structures and stuff like that. Take experiments up there and reuse the Artemis in the beginning of the Artemis stuff. And if we really got serious, we'd get a new spacecraft that would carry more and maybe unmanned stuff, the land material on the moon that would maybe flop open or something like that. You got to put a lot of thought into it before we commit to something like that. But a space station on the moon, a space base that's scientific and in purpose, I think is really, really important. So hopefully we'll see.
The question arises then, I mean, if it's so hostile, for a lot of people, they see space, what's the point? What's the added value or the benefit for Earth? And having a space station on the moon, what exactly would it do to Earth? So what is the value of exploration? What is the value of doing these projects?
I think the expansion of knowledge in the early days of can humans even survive in space? We proved we could. We knew we had to protect them from some radiation, so we learned how to do that. And so these long duration stays, people have been in space station for over a year. And that's a long time in space. But they exercise and they stay in shape. And so the muscles don't deteriorate. And on the moon, as you build up your capability down there, the moon is very rich in minerals. Some of the rocks that we brought back, if I remember, 20% aluminum. Other rocks have other resource minerals that we can mine and bring back. There's a helium isotope on the moon, helium-3, that Jack Schmitt on Apollo 17 is now pushing to mine that and bring it back. It's fissionable or fusionable, one or the other. It's radioactive, but when it's put in a reactor, it doesn't leave any radioactive residue. You use it all. And a ton of that helium-3, which we don't have down here on Earth, will, now don't hold me exactly to this figure that Jack gave me, but it'll power New York City for a year. And it was in a nuclear reactor, of course, but it would be no residue left over, so we don't have any disposal problem. So we learned how to mine that, bring that back. And so there are a lot of mining opportunities for some maybe even rare earths and stuff like that. And in the future, we're going to need to think about where we're going to get all this stuff that runs our economy and factories.
And you think we're going to be able to figure out solutions for the moon dust? I hear the moon dust is quite a pain to deal with.
Well, in Apollo it was because you tracked it all back inside. Outside, it gets all over your suit. You can't brush it off. It's so fine. But we had no trouble walking on it. We had no trouble digging down into it with a shovel. I pounded a 3-meter drill into the moon and collected a 3-meter sample of moon dust. And so we brought that back, and the moon dust is very clingy. And in Apollo, unfortunately, we brought it all back inside in our suits and our boots. But in the future spacecraft, they go, if you're going to use it for back and forth, you need an airlock so that you get it shut off from the crew station, and the suits are in there, and you just leave all the dust and stuff in the airlock, and you get back into a clean spacecraft. The moon dust is very, very fine, like powder, and we found out you could not brush it off the suit. It just got into the fiber of the suits, and the suits turned black. And that's just the way the moon dust was. And so we brought back a lot inside because we didn't have any airlocks. And when we got back in orbit, that's when the moon dust problem really manifested itself. All this dust started floating around the spacecraft. It was moon dust everywhere. And we stayed fully enclosed in our spacesuit because there was so much moon dust. And we didn't want to expose the environmental control system to it or us breathe it. So we, in our suits, and when we docked up, manually opened the hatch, and he looked in, and the moon dust was everywhere. He said, "You're not coming in here," and he closed the door again. And a little bit later, he located his vacuum cleaner. He had a little dust devil, and he opened the hatch, floated it over, and we used it to dust up they suck up the dust. And now finally we got it clean enough for him to let us inside. And we transferred everything back over and left the dusty lunar module stuff up in orbit, and it eventually crashed on the moon.
My God. How much weight of material were you able to bring back?
The last 3 missions were called J missions, and they were able to stay on the moon for 72 hours. So that meant you had 3 excursions, 1 excursion every 24 hours. So most of the moon rocks were brought back in Apollo 15, 16, and 17. We had about 207 pounds. Apollo 17 came back with the most, and it was 230 or something like that. But anyway, over 600 pounds of moon rock were brought back in the last 3 missions. A lot, and so probably maybe 150 pounds in the first 3, and then in the last 3 we were staying and collecting. It was a lot of stuff. So our rocks were unique because we were in the lunar highlands. They weren't volcanic. They had some volcanic fragments in them, but mostly they were igneous rock. And the geologists were very, very excited about sending us to the lunar highlands. We were the only flight that ventured into the mountains of the moon. Everybody else landed on the Maury. So if you assume Neil Armstrong on Apollo 11 was sea level for moon, we were 8,000 feet above that landing spot. And so the rocks were different, igneous rocks mostly. I don't know whether that's the right term or not, but anyway, it had crystals. There was no volcanics up there, which surprised our geologists. They thought we were going to run into 2 different geologic flows that came together on the Cayley Plain where we landed, but there wasn't any. So at first, I think, and we started describing these rocks, and because they're expecting volcanic, and we're not talking volcanic. And I think the science team who had taught us geology said, we wasted 8 years on these dummies. They don't know what they're saying. What are they talking about? Then they got excited when everything we picked up we were describing. And so they never had any rocks like that. And still to this day, the only mission that brought back those highland rocks, mountain rocks, were Apollo 16.
Do you remember what were the motivations to have such a drastic different landing spot from 8,000 feet difference? Was there something there that they wanted specifically to go and check, or?
Geologically, it was going to be different. It was the mountains of the moon. It wasn't on the Maury. The Maury is the dark areas that you see on the front side of the moon. and every other mission had landed on the Mare. And so they were getting, and the Mare is the dark area, it's the black volcanic. So they either landed on the edge of the Mare or in the Mare for all of them. And so we were the only mission that was targeted to the lunar highlands and as scientific. Primarily, they wanted to see what kind of volcanic rocks there were up in the highlands, but there weren't any. So they got very excited about the rocks we were collecting and the rocks we brought back.
What were your personal feelings, Charlie, when they announced the Apollo program was to be terminated?
Everybody's very sad, of course. On one hand, crew-wise, we were disappointed because we lost 3 landings on the moon, 18, 19, and 20. And we had the crews picked out for them, and we had the vehicles that were not ready to go, but they could get ready to go. They were built and just standing by. Apollo was so successful, they decided to save the money and use it on space shuttle because we would just repeat. So they'd gotten about all the information that they thought they could garner from the moon through a 17. And so they canceled that. We lost the 3 final missions. And of course, those people that had been selected for the crew were very disappointed. That's just the success of Apollo. We said, we don't need to do this anymore. We got all the information that we can study for years and years and years.
Your entire journey had its up and down, and looking in hindsight, was there any moment where you said, that's not worth, doesn't matter if we can get to the moon, this is not worth all the problems that comes with it, I'm just going to go and do something else? Was there moments like that in your career?
Not a bit. In fact, we were the next to the last mission to the moon, and Apollo 17 would be the last, and they didn't have a backup crew. So I said, John, why don't we be the backup crew? He said, it's a dead-end job, isn't it? I said, maybe they break their leg and we get to go again. He said, hey, that's not a bad idea. So we started training as backup crew. We were really excited about going again. Of course, they stayed healthy and we didn't get to go again. But it was never a thought in my mind during all of Apollo where this is too risky. We shouldn't be doing this. There was a fleeting thought on Apollo 8. First time we went to the moon with people, and to me, it was the riskiest mission on Apollo. We sent these guys to the moon with no backup. The command module had to work. It was only the second time that the command module had flown with people on board. It was the first time that anybody had ever ridden the Saturn V in a spacecraft, and so there was a lot of first on Apollo 8. And I think it was major decision on management part, and the crew said, yeah, we'll go. If you go back, we were in a sort of a space race with the Russians, and we had some intelligence that, well, they're trying to get to the moon, we got to go first. And so Apollo 8 was the response to this space race. And the crew, Lovell and Borman and Anders, said, we'll go. We're ready to go. It was going to be a real thrill for them, and first time humans had been out of Earth orbit. Second time, I think I said it, but second time we had people on board the spacecraft, the Apollo command module, and the first time anybody had ever ridden the Saturn V. It was a lot of firsts, and a lot of scary firsts, really, especially when they left Earth orbit. They were on their own. If that accident that happened to the command service module that happened on Apollo 13 that happened to them, they'd have been dead. Fortunately, we had a successful mission and learned a lot, and we continued on full bore. The only time, of course, after 13, it required a 2-year repair of figuring out what wrong and to get it back on track. So our flight was delayed from early 70 until April of 72. And it took them that long to figure out what happened on Apollo 13 and correct the procedures and the hardware, and before they were satisfied, we're ready to go.
The competition with Russia was very much, the source of going to the moon. That was the incentive. And some say that the worst thing that happened to the space program is actually we did get to the moon. because then after that it took away the incentive. Do you think that like right now the competition that we're with China is also bringing back a certain sense of urgency to get back to the moon?
In a way, yeah. We're still probably the space cooperation with the Russians is probably the one area of our relationship with the Russians that's still solid. We good friends with the cosmonauts, and we've never had a hiccup with the Russians once we started a Soyuz, Apollo Soyuz, 1975, where we had that rendezvous. So I think that the Chinese are on their own. I don't know how advanced that program is. They haven't had anybody out of Earth orbit, and I don't know their schedule, but, it would be first time back to the moon, but they won't be first on doing anything except maybe having a space station up there. So we'll see how it goes. I'm glad to see the focus now pivoting to Artemis, where we'll have a big spacecraft, a lander, and it's a complicated machine and mission. For first Artemis is more like Apollo, first two landings. And then after that, they're landing on the South Pole. If you look at the photographs from taken in orbit of the South Pole, it's very, very rough. But they've got basically a fully automatic spacecraft that cameras everywhere and software, and it can guide them in. So, but their lander is 30 meters, probably tall. Ours was 8 or 9. So it wasn't made to reuse, but this whole thing's going to land and then lift off again, refurbish, and then come back and land again. So it's challenging. Artemis 2 crew, they're going to be first back to the moon as far as we're concerned, and it's going to be just Apollo, Artemis, I think Artemis 2 and 3. After that, they'll be prepared to go into this polar orbit, which is quite a change from what we had. So we'll see. I'm all for it. And we got a copy of the crew. Artemis 2 crew is the first one going to the moon, and there's 5 of them on board. No, 4. And they sent me a copy of their patch. So hopefully we'll stay on schedule. It's supposed to be spring of next year.
Spring of next year. In orbit.
Yeah.
Right?
In lunar orbit, yeah. In an equatorial orbit like we had in Apollo.
Do you think that the first private lunar landing is not too far behind?
Probably. I think the space station, not space station, but SpaceX and Blue Origin, involved with a little company called Phantom Space. We're building a rocket that's more payload-wise. It's smaller and cheaper. And so people, if you got 20 kilos you want to get into space, you come to us. But SpaceX and Blue Origin, they've got dynamic programs, and they make decisions quickly, and they're very, very good at what they do. So I see something maybe on the SpaceX side of using the Artemis spacecraft, the command module, which was left over from way back 20 years ago when George W. Bush was president, and he had a program to return to the moon, but Obama canceled it all. And the only thing that was saved out of it was their command module, which is the Artemis spacecraft. And it looks like a Apollo on steroids. But the lander is totally different. And it's, as I said, 30 meters tall and doesn't stage. It lands and then lifts off. Hopefully they know how to stabilize it on rough terrain and tilty terrain, because I don't know where the CG is on a 30 meter tall vehicle, but it's way up there. They you're gonna have a problem. But I watch simulations, and they got a lot of cameras and a lot of software to stabilize the thing, so I think they'll be okay. So a spacecraft that's totally different than Apollo. We had little switches everywhere, and we could control it on and off. And this basically has flip it on and select this mode and select that mode. And so the panels are totally different, but they got big windows and all, and a lot of outside references through television cameras and sensors and stuff like that.
How did you get to be involved with Apollo? I mean, that was really back in the days. I'm not too sure if space was a possibility. Did you always look up to the stars and was captivated, or you started a career as a pilot and then slowly, gradually, these opportunities presented themselves?
Well, when I went to flight school, I graduated Naval Academy in '57, and but went into the Air Force, and but which was an opportunity, a selection back in those days. There wasn't an Air Force Academy, so they would allow 25% of the class to join the Air Force, and it's very popular. I fell in love with airplanes while I was at the Naval Academy. And I didn't qualify due to astigmatism in my right eye. I didn't qualify for naval aviation, but the Air Force took me. So I went to flight school and got my wings. And let's see, that was, well, let me back up a minute. I got my wings in '59, and NASA was formed in '59, and the first astronauts were selected in '59. And so as I was going to Germany, the NASA and the astronaut program was getting going. And I got over to Germany. I had a great job flying fighters over there for 3 years. And Air Force wanted to send me back to MIT, so they picked now at least two groups of astronauts. Well, I'm too young, too unexperienced. I don't have a chance at that job. Began to think about it because, what a deal that would be. What a ride. So Air Force wanted to send me back to MIT. And so I took for a master's degree in aeronautics and astronautics. And I was to leave Germany in the spring of 1959. No, 62. And I could stay another year in this great job, but this a decision. It said, go on to MIT. If I hadn't made that decision and gone to MIT in that spring of 1959, 62, I never would have met my wife, and I never would have become an astronaut. I didn't realize the decision was that important, but little things like that, in your life. Well, anyway, I get to MIT, and after a year, MIT had the contract to build the Apollo guidance and navigation system. And so I was working on that system as my master's thesis, and it was a statistical. This is what we built. Can anybody really work this system? And they needed some pilots with some of, that kind of skill to take the data. So I was taking the data. And so for 6 months, and this was in the early 1964, and some astronauts came to MIT to review the system, to look at it and see how it worked. So I met them, and I don't remember the name of Charlie Bassett was one, and a couple of others. But anyway, I never met anybody that's so gung-ho about a job as they were. And I said, how did I get that job? And they said, well, get your degree and go to test pilot school, and you might have a chance. So I followed their advice. And Air Force sent me to a test pilot school. When I graduated, Dottie and I got married June of '63. And then we went to Edwards. I finished test pilot school in June of '65, and in September of '65, NASA had another call of astronauts, and I applied. And 6 months later, in April, I believe it was, 1966, I got a call from Deke Slayton. It says, we selected you, be here in 30 days. And Yahoo. So that started it all. First off, I was working the final stages of Gemini, and they had astronauts, not only the Capcom, but they had another guy that was an astronaut was in there, and he was sort of the booster guy. And it didn't have much to do, but that's what they had an astronaut for. Anyway, I did that for a couple of flights, and then Apollo started, and I got assigned to some Apollo stuff. And in '67, right after, let's see, it would be January, that's when the fire occurred and killed the 3 crew. And that set everything back a couple of years. And it was a tough time in the astronaut office. And we had not only Charlie Bassett and Elliot C. were killed in a plane crash up in McDonald. Then Ted Freeman was killed in a plane crash. We had the 3 killed in the fire. That's 6. We had automobile accident, killed 1 guy. And then another airplane accident later on that killed another guy. So we had 8 funerals in about 2 years in the astronaut office. Of course, Apollo was set back. They had to redesign that. And so I ended up working a lot on Apollo, training as geology and all of that stuff. But my primary duties were, first off, I was on a group called a Emergency Egress Working Group. How you get off the launch pad? Good question in an emergency. So there were actually two ways: jump out of the spacecraft, hook up to the slide wire, and jump off and go down the slide wire, which was probably the quickest and safest. The other was run across the swing arm down, get in the elevator, free fall down into the catacombs of the launch pad and run into the what they call the blast room down there. And there was a big room that was on springs way down into the pad. Going in, you could close the door, and there was enough supplies in there for 30 days that the crew could stay down there trapped until they were able to dig you out. That was the idea. So I worked on those escape routes and with Stu Russo mostly. Anyway, then I started getting stuff working on backup, a support crew for Apollo 10, and then backup crew on 13, and prime crew on 16, and then backup crew on 17. So of the 9 missions to the moon, I worked on 5 of them. More than anybody else in the whole astronaut office. Only got to fly once, but nobody got to fly the moon twice except for Lovell and Tom Stafford and Gene Cernan. 3 guys.
And you're all living in the same village, right? The same astronaut village?
We're in the same area. We live in a place called El Lago, and we had a lot of astronauts, John Young and Ed White and Neil Armstrong and Frank Borman and John Young and myself and Stu Russo and several others. So we had about 10 or 15 astronauts living in this little community. So it was a great place to raise 2 kids and little boys. And they started their school work there while we were still there. And Ed White Elementary School. It was a nice place to live. A lot of astronauts lived in a place called Nassau Bay, which was more upscale neighborhood. But we decided we liked it. We bought a lot next to Bill Anders and built a house right next to him. So he was our neighbor, next door neighbor. So we lived there until 1960. When did I leave? In 1970. 76, I left NASA and started a beer business. I'd taken my eyes off the moon and put them on money. You know, after you walk on the moon at 20-something years old, what are you going to do now? You know, how do you top that? So I think, well, money, a career in business would be my opportunity. So finished my Air Force career as a reservist, went into business, made a lot of money, but that didn't hack it either, so I sold that. Then I became a Christian. I did become a believer in 75, so we started walking with the Lord, and that gave me an overall purpose of serving God. So we formed, later on, we formed Duke Ministry for Christ, and we started traveling, speaking. And then I was doing motivational speaking also as a moonwalker. And very popular and a lot of activity. So anyway, still to this day involved in speaking, not only evangelistically, but also for companies and conventions and stuff like that. Also an ambassador for Omega Watch and do appearances for them. We're going to be in New York in a couple of weeks and at a boutique up there. So anyway, full life, enjoying my 9 grandkids, and 1 great-granddaughter, another one on the way. So life is good.
Charlie, you and I, we talked about, you watched the movie The First Man, and you had some kind of a strong opinion of the movie, because Neil, the character that was portrayed in the movie, is quite different than the Neil you knew, correct?
Yeah, it was totally different Neil than I recall. I recall Neil and the movie sort of showed his expertise in the astronaut office, and he was a good choice for being number 1 pilot, the pilot to land on the moon, because he was probably the best test pilot we had. But he was quiet and unassuming, and they lived right down the street from us, and we never sensed any tension in their family or between the two of them. And that movie, when she came into the crew quarters where they were in quarantine, and he's on one side of the glass and she's on the other, and they didn't say anything. That wasn't them. It's just, I mean, how could they possibly not be excited and yahooing each other, and glad to see one another. And so there was a lot about that movie that we didn't think was right, but that's the way it was. Anyway, the movie portrayed them as standoffish, and they weren't at all.
Charlie, as a long career astronaut, moonwalker, test pilot, motivational speaker, a man of faith, what would be your 3 words of wisdom?
In all of your success, don't forget God. So don't forget God in your life.
There's been a big part, but it was not at the beginning, if I understand correctly. It was a moment in your life, right?
Yeah, it's 1975. Dottie, our marriage was, after I got back from the moon, our marriage was headed towards divorce. I was not loving her like I should. I wasn't the dad I should be. I was had a critical spirit and everything, and it had developed that I was frustrated. I'd walked on the moon, top of the ladder. Now what are you going to do? Most of the moonwalkers had that. And so our marriage was sailing towards the rocks of divorce. And in 75, things were so bad that Dottie was considering suicide. And when some people came to church, our church, and shared their faith, just little simple stories about how God had changed their life, changed their marriage. They were vibrant and glowed with love of God. And so when we came home that weekend, this was in fall of 1975, Dottie went into our room and closed the door and says, "I've tried everything but you, Jesus." When she said that, he said, the peace of God came over her. She had committed, that night, she committed her life to Jesus. And it was a slow change, but it was positive. And that was a couple of months before we left NASA. And I was starting a beer business. And we moved to San Antonio area. And for the next 2 years, I was running this business, finishing my Air Force commitment in the reserves, and things at home were getting such different. She had really changed. And she wasn't on my case. She didn't bug me anything about God or anything, just loved me and tried to do her part of what marriage is all about. So I got frustrated with the beer business. So I sold the Coors beer distributorship, made a lot of money, and that was in March of 78. So a friend of mine invited me to come to a Bible study one weekend out at T-Bar M Tennis Ranch. They had a convention center. So I didn't want to go, but he said, "God, come on." So I went, and it was called Walk Through the Bible, and it was the story of Jesus from beginning to end. So after that was over, there were many scriptures, but after that was all over, I was sitting in my automobile, and I had heard the scriptures that I hadn't heard. This was the first time I'd listened to the scriptures since I was a little kid. And the scriptures, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. If you believe in him, you'll not perish but have everlasting life. Now, is that true, or is that a big lie? Make up your mind, Charlie. And all this is going through my mind. And another scripture, Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to God except through me." That's either true or it isn't. So we all get to decide whether it's true or not. So I'm sitting in my automobile on Sunday afternoon, and I looked over at Dottie, and she had come to this Bible study too. I said, "Darling, there's no doubt in my mind that Jesus is the Son of God." I said, "God, I give you my life." And at that point, the peace of God fell on me. And I knew that I'd made the right decision. I had this insatiable desire to read the Bible. So the next day I started reading the Bible. To me, I found the Bible is God's handbook for life. And so God was leading me as I was reading. And as I was reading, there were 3 things in my life. I didn't love my wife. I didn't love my kids. And I had a greedy attitude. So God led me to scriptures. And in one scripture says, in Ephesians, it says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." And I said, "Lord, I don't love my wife that way." And I never heard God's voice in my ears, but in my heart I did. It says, "You're right, repent." So I went to Dottie and said, "Lord, forgive me." And that started a foundation to build, I don't know which to build our marriage. Then I got to Proverbs, and one of the Proverbs, it says, "You have the power of life and death in your tongue." Powerful word. And so you can speak life or you can speak death. And God spoke to my heart and said, "You've spoken death to your kids. You've cursed them." And man, that shocked me because I loved them, but I was just military drill instructor dad. And so anyway, I called them up. I called them in and we sat down and I repented in front of them, said, "Boys, I'm sorry. I'm going to be the dad that God wants me to be." And the youngest one was about 9 at the time, I think. Tom said, "That's okay, Dad." So I started blessing my kids instead of cursing my kids. And they began to blossom, then become very successful now in their careers. And they've blessed us with 9 grandchildren over the years. And then the last big deal, I had more sins than this, but these are the big ones, was I was reading Malachi, and Malachi talks to the people back then and says, "You're robbing me." I said, "What do you mean, God? We're robbing you in tithes and offerings. You're robbing me." And God spoke to my heart. He said, "You're robbing me." And so I prayed and I said, "What should I do?" And God said, "Tithe. That's 10%. We weren't even close to that. And so I said to Dottie, I said, "God spoke to me about giving." And he said, "Well, what did he say?" I said, "Well, strong word. Why don't you go pray and see what he says?" So about a week later, she came back and said, "God spoke to me." And I said, "About money." I said, "What was it he say?" He said, "Tithe." So we started giving. And you cannot outgive God, Daniel. He just pours his blessings in. So financially, I've been very successful. And the more successful I am, the more we're able to give. Like I just said, you can't outgive him. So he blesses us and we bless others with whatever he says, not only to our church, but ministries all over the world. We support a guy in India. We support people in Africa, Southeast Asia, and people that God has put us into our path and speaks to us. And so we start giving to them. And it's been a real blessing. So then God continues to bless us with my motivational speaking and investments that I've made on good advice and stuff. And so we're blessed financially. And that's why I keep saying you can't outgive God. Give, and it should be given unto you, he says. So that's my story. And I'm sticking to it.
I've met your family and they're absolutely lovely and you've lived an aspirational life. And if there's one thing that radiates between you and Dottie and the kids is definitely love. So you've done something right and glad that you're continuing to doing so. Charlie, it's always a pleasure. A big hug to you and Dottie, and I look forward. Tristan and I obviously we're a big fan of yours, and we look forward to seeing you again.
We look forward to it also, Daniel. Tell Tristan a hug for us, and I've enjoyed this podcast. So hope it works out for you.
Absolutely, always. Enjoy the rest of the day.
You too. Thanks.